Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 398, Hi-Ho Silverwind, the first episode of the Grand Festival. The episode begins with Ash and the gang having finally arrived in Slateport City for the Hoenn Grand Festival. May had been anticipating this moment for a very fucking long time. She was extremely hyped up, especially after all the vigorous training and many contests she's entered. As they approached the contest hall, Ash and the gang first admired the view of the exterior, since it looked pretty fucking huge, and Ash, Brock, and Max congratulated May for making it this far, and May thanks them for the compliment, as they then step inside the contest hall to officially register May for the Grand Festival, immediately stopping at the front desk, as May gives the receptionist there her contest membership card, so that the receptionist could see her profile, as well as all her 5 Pokemon, Combuskin, Beautyfly, Skitty, Bulbasaur, and Munchlax. After all her Pokemon were signed in, the receptionist then requested that May show proof of her having all 5 ribbons, so that, she could actually enter the festival, and May obliges, pulling out her ribbon case and opening it up to show all 5 of her ribbons. So the receptionist used her registering device to verify all of May's ribbons, and therefore May was officially entered into the Grand Festival, and the receptionist gave her a guidebook showing maps of Slateport City, so that she could kill some time. And also, the guidebook contained specific restaurant locations in the city, because they knew that coordinators love to eat, and it also contained maps of the stadiums of the Grand Festival inside the contest hall, so that coordinators could plan their performances accordingly. And also, there were some extra rules in the guidebook, as the rules for the Grand Festival were a bit different than your traditional contest. The receptionist then gave May one last thing, being a ticket for an apartment that was basically like a luxurious hotel that Ash and the gang were allowed to stay in, since they were official competitors. Ash and the gang were amazed at the fact that they got to stay in a luxurious apartment, even when they found out that they only got to stay in one of the rooms, as they were impressed with just how big the actual apartment was in the first place. Before they could enter the apartment building, though, Ash and the gang were caught by surprise, especially May, as a person suddenly came up behind her and closed her eyes, so that she couldn't see jack shit, but she soon stopped this and laughed, since she was just teasing May. It was none other than her mother, Caroline. Although May was surprised, Max and May were absolutely delighted to see their mother, with Max even admitting that he really missed her, and that was unusual for him, because he usually just, kept up in his room and stuff to study some books. Caroline then stated that she should have not surprised May and Max at all, because they should have expected for her to come and watch in person, since this was such an important moment for May, and she had apparently heard about her victory in Pacific Log somehow, so she knew that May had 5 ribbons, and was going to be entering the Grand Festival. Caroline then greets Ash and Brock, reminding them of their promise to try and keep May and Max safe, and improving as people, with Brock assuring Caroline that he'd been keeping May and Max safe by always making sure they eat healthy meals that he cooked, and Ash pointed out that he'd been helping May train, pointing out also that he had won 8 gym badges, which May confirmed, adding that Ash was now heading for the Evergrande Conference next. Although, May then changed the subject of the conversation a bit, as soon as Caroline thanked Ash and Brock for keeping their promise of keeping Max and May safe, with May asking where the fuck Norman was, leading Caroline to reveal that Norman was initially going to come, but he couldn't make it because he was too busy at the gym, which was getting quite a bit of challengers recently, so he just couldn't leave. But Caroline assured May that even though Norman couldn't be there in person, he would be sure to watch on TV once the Grand Festival actually started, and not miss a single moment if it was possible. Basically, any fucking free time he had, he'd be watching, and even when he was battling, he'd have the TV on in the background. Ash and Max then examined the beautiful view that led you to see the ocean from out of their hotel room, with Ash being the first one to see it, and then pointing it out to Max, while Caroline and Brock talk about what meals he'd been feeding everyone, because Caroline was really big on healthy meals. Anyways, Ash then calls for May's attention, telling her to take a look at the beautiful ocean view. But while May was admiring the view, she was interrupted by her mother Caroline, who revealed that she didn't just come to watch May participate, she actually came to deliver some mail, specifically some letters. And as May read these letters, she recognized all of the senders. There were a lot of letters though, so she gave some of them to Max and Brock to read with her. Anyways, these letters were from all the people that May had met through her journey that were also coordinators. There was a letter from Kelly from Lily Cove City, who May remembered as the woman that taught her how to make Pokeblocks. And then the one Brock was reading was the one from Savannah and her daughter Sandra from Rubello Town. And May also found letters from Timmy, aka the Phantom, or formerly the Phantom, from Verdanturf, Abby from the breeding center, who had that Delcatty, and even Janet and Chaz had sent her a letter. The couple that she met back when she saw her first ever contest in Rustboro that made her interested in contests in the first place. The one where she helped Janet out. Anyways, in all the letters, all of these people confirmed that they couldn't make it to the Grand Festival this year themselves, since they couldn't collect enough ribbons in time, but they figured that May would have made it into the contest after hearing about the results of all of them and coming to the conclusion that May had won 5 ribbons, so they all decided to send May letters to support her and wish her luck this year in the Grand Festival. When Caroline read all these letters, she remarked that she was shocked that May had made this many friends throughout her journey, as she hadn't been gone that fucking long, but May confirms that she had, obviously. May then gets a little tensed up and nervous just thinking about the contest and the Grand Festival and shit, scared that she may lose in front of thousands of people, and she was just scared to be in front of thousands of people to begin with, knowing that this Grand Festival would be more popular than any of her other contests up to this point. She starts shaking under nervousness, but eventually she calms herself down, realizing she had nothing to be afraid of, because everyone, including her friends, her mother, and her Pokemon, were supporting her. May and Caroline then asked Brock to look through the guidebook, to look through all the rules and explain them, and also reveal how the rounds would be divided, like basically how many people would advance through each round. So, as Brock read the guidebook, he revealed that the rules were just like the rules in the Rubelo Town contest that abided by official Grand Festival rules. Basically, different Pokemon were to be used in every round, and just like any normal contest, it had preliminary appeal matches followed by the main contest matches. Also, there were 247 total coordinators competing in the preliminary matches, but only 64 coordinators would move on to the main contest battles. So yeah, it'd be basically 247 people in the appeals, and then after a whole bunch of appeals rounds, they would make it to the battle rounds, where only 64 would compete in that. While Ash and Max were surprised by how many coordinators wouldn't make it to the battle rounds, Brock simply suggested to May that she should do some training before the preliminary rounds, and May agreed that this was a good idea. Outside the apartment, though, it seemed as though all the other coordinators participating in the Grand Festival had the same idea regarding training, so a whole bunch of coordinators were training with all their Pokemon, including a coordinator with a Caterpie, one with a Spearow, one with a Sandshrew, Nidoran male, Nidoran female, Clefairy, Oddish, Vileplume, Geodude, Coughing, Jinx, Eevee, Spinarak, Marill, Sudowoodo, Skiploom, Apom, Espeon, Houndoom, Houndour, Swinub, Poochyena, Cascoon, Lotad, Zigzagoon, Talo, Ninjask, Shedinja, Electrike, Vibrava, Trapinch, Shelgon, and Illumise. Yeah, I know, there's a lot of fucking people, and that's not even all 247 of them. Technically, there could be a trainer with basically every single goddamn Pokemon up to this point. Almost. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, they had also arrived just outside of the contest hall, and decided to try and pull a scam, with Jessie suggesting that James disguise himself as Norman, and he did so, with Jessie disguising herself as Norman's pretend manager, and they basically were giving out false autographs as Norman, even though James obviously wasn't Norman. Obviously, due to how popular Norman was, an entire crowd of people had gathered around Jessie and James, wanting autographs, including one kid in a blue shirt with brown hair who ran up, extremely interested in an autograph more than anyone, and asked in disbelief if James was really Norman, and Jessie, as the manager, confirmed this on James's behalf, and just because they were used to it, Jessie and James almost fucking blew their cover by greeting the boy with their motto, since that's what they were used to doing. But they quickly stopped themselves, since they knew that there was no point in doing the motto, since they weren't going to unveil their disguises, since Action Gang weren't nearby. The boy expresses his doubt that Norman was actually Norman, saying that that's why he asked in the first place, because, you know, he basically kind of caught on to the fact that James wasn't actually Norman, since he didn't look like he did in all of the photos that he had seen. But James simply said that the reason why he looked different was because all the photos were taken by special photographers he hired, who made him look better than in real life. The boy ended up believing James's lie, so he asked for an autograph, pulling out his autograph book for Norman to sign. It was basically a book that he specifically had saved for autographs. Although Team Rocket get mad at the boy, saying that they weren't going to sign his goddamn book. They worked hard signing a whole bunch of pre-signed posters that they would just give out to people instead. But the boy insisted on having his book signed, so this just made Jessie even angrier at the boy, who said that if he wanted a goddamn autograph, then he would have to pay for yelling at them first. The boy claimed that he had no money, but Jessie and James clarified that the payment was not money. And it was then that Team Rocket implemented their plan, as they claimed that if the boy wanted an autograph, he would have to attend a Pokemon counseling session where Norman gave advice on Pokemon, and she proceeded to show an advertisement poster for this counseling session. The counseling session didn't seem so bad at first, but Team Rocket clearly had some nefarious plans with it. Maybe they wanted to lure this boy to a counseling session, but then they would make him pay after. But since he would feel guilty about not paying, since he got a whole session, then he would essentially be forced to pay. Like, this was probably a money-making scheme by Team Rocket and all that. And the boy was a bit skeptical to go to this counseling session, but Jessie tried to hype it up. The boy barely even paid attention to Jessie, though, because he didn't even know who the fuck she was, because he only knew about Norman, and he asked if Jessie was Norman's mom, which makes Jessie extremely angry, as she yells at the boy, clarifying that she was Norman's manager. Jessie got so angry at the boy that James forcibly had to push her back and restrain her a little bit and apologize on her behalf so that the boy didn't get scared, and simply just invited the boy kindly to the counseling session, and also advised all the other crowd members in the area who had gathered to come to the session as well, assuring that he would give plenty of advice on how they could all raise their Pokemon. The whole crowd, who were all Norman fans, got immensely excited at the prospect of Norman teaching them some shit, so they all decided to come to this counseling session. James starts to explain some bullshit, since he obviously had no clue about what actually to say, since he wasn't Norman. And Meowth listens in, and it's revealed that he was the one who came up with the plan to make James dress up as Norman. Basically, Meowth knew that all these trainers here had to be good, since they were participating in the Grand Festival, so therefore they had a lot of strong Pokemon that would all be worth stealing. So basically, Team Rocket were luring them to go talk to James, so that James could analyze their Pokemon and tell them how to raise them, when in reality, they would just steal all these Pokemon. Anyways, as James continues to bullshit, Meowth gives everyone who came their promised reward, which was an autographed poster already. That was already autographed, so that they didn't have to autograph it on the spot. And while Meowth was giving out these autographed posters, Wobbuffet popped out of his Pokeball, forcing Jessie to quickly recall it, because no one associated to Norman had a Wobbuffet. Meanwhile, May, along with the rest of the gang, and Caroline had just went outside of the apartment place to go train, and they immediately spotted several other coordinators training with all the Pokemon that I mentioned before. Particularly, they see a guy training his Zigzagoon and a guy training his Houndoom. May didn't want to be outshined by the other coordinators, and she also wanted to show off her Pokemon to her mother, so she sent out all 5 of her Pokemon. And was about to have them all use some moves that they usually used in contests to try and impress her mother even further, but her mother was already amazed, showing a fondness to Beautyfly because of how elegant it was. And although she admitted that all of May's other Pokemon, such as Munchlax, Bulbasaur, Combusken, and Skitty, were all cute as well, she had a particular soft spot for Beautyfly since it brought back her wonderful memories of her first romantic night with Norman. May wanted to change the subject of the conversation away from anything related to her mom and dad fucking at all, so she explains that her Beautyfly was the Pokemon that she won her first contest with. Ash felt motivated seeing all this training, wanting to train himself, and he was also a bit jealous of all the attention that May was getting with her Pokemon, so he decided to bring some attention to himself by sending out his Snorunt to try and perfect its Ice Beam again, because Ash thought this area would be relatively okay if the Ice Beams did go haywire, since it was practically an open field, and everyone was occupied with training their Pokemon anyways. Unfortunately, when Ash had his Snorunt use an Ice Beam, the beam simply went around in circles before almost hitting all of May's Pokemon, as they all nervously hid behind her, but they didn't have to worry, because as usual, the Ice Beam ended up just freezing Ash yet again. While Ash was trying to unfreeze himself, Munchlax, who had hidden behind May in fear of the Ice Beam, Munchlax happened to spot a coordinator practicing feeding his Zigzagoon by tossing the Pokeblocks to it, and Zigzagoon seemed to be very much enjoying the Pokeblocks. So Munchlax got jealous, wanting the Pokeblocks for itself, so right as the coordinator tossed another Pokeblock at Zigzagoon, Munchlax jumped over to intercept before Zigzagoon could catch the Pokeblock, and caught it himself instead, eating it. Leaving Ash, Brock, and Max and Caroline immensely shocked by Munchlax's speed, while May just runs up to the trainer with the Zigzagoon and apologizes for the situation, although the trainer didn't even get angry, saying that he had plenty of spare Pokeblocks, so it was no worry. Nonetheless, though, May wanted to try and discipline Munchlax and try and explain to it that eating other people's food was wrong. Max wasn't sure this was possible, so he instead just came up with a way to keep Munchlax satisfied so that it wouldn't eat other people's food for a while, which was to open up the Pokeblock case of May's and take out some of her custom Pokeblocks that she made, her own surprise recipe. Remember that? Yeah, well, Max still had some, so he just gave it to Munchlax, which caused it to fall asleep, super full. So, at least now, it wouldn't eat anyone else's food. May was kind of embarrassed to admit that she had such a disobeying Pokemon that would just keep eating other people's food, but Caroline said that it wasn't really May's fault, and she wasn't surprised that Munchlax was eating other people's food, stating that the rumors of Munchlax's unstoppable appetite must have been true, and she then pets Munchlax while it sleeps to put it into an even deeper sleep, as May tells her that Munchlax also likes to run off as well, so they had to keep a close eye on it all the time. Not just because it could get lost when it ran off, but because it could eat other people's food when it ran off, so it was just a massive troublemaker. It's then revealed that Drew and his Roselia had been standing by and observing everything that May had been doing with her Munchlax, and May soon notices him and runs up to him, and the two greet each other, with May quickly darting away from the rest of the gang and her mother and Munchlax in the process. Caroline was confused with where May was going, so Ash, Max, and Brock explained that Drew was her rival. Anyways, as for Drew and May's conversation, Drew taunted that he didn't expect May to actually make it to the Grand Festival, leading May to state that Drew should know by now that she was just as good of a coordinator as he was, and said that Drew probably knew this, but he was just too scared to admit it, and started to brag about how fucking awesome she was as a coordinator. But Drew simply just said that even if May said she was a good coordinator, that didn't mean that it was true, and this made May extremely fucking pissed off at the fact that Drew just wouldn't accept that she was actually a good coordinator, and she started to yell. Drew decides to shut May up by giving her a rose, admitting that he did admire her enthusiasm and how fired up she was that she could win, and congratulated her on actually making it to the Grand Festival. But just like how Gary used to be nice and then a complete fucking cunt to Ash, Drew was kind of the same thing with May, as we knew, as he's like, alright, I appreciate your enthusiasm, and I wish you good luck, but enthusiasm does not equal pure talent. So it was basically his way of saying, you're not gonna win, bitch. You needed more than just enthusiasm for that, you needed talent too. Although May started to yell at Drew again, grabbing the rose from his hand and saying that there was no fucking way Drew would talk down to her once she had the ribbon cup in her possession. Drew just laughed at this, so May calmed herself down and intimidatingly said that Drew would see that he was wrong to think May was weak when he actually saw her compete in the Grand Festival. Just then, none other than Harley showed up and immediately ran over to May and Drew, although he was obviously there for May, because he didn't even know who the fuck Drew was. Of course, May was initially very skeptical about Harley approaching her because of how much of a dick he was last time, and when Brock, Ash, and Max saw Harley as well, they were not happy to see him either. Caroline wondered why everyone was so on edge around him, assuming he was probably one of May's friends if he was, happily going up to her and all that, but Max explained what had happened at the Purika City contest, saying that Harley cheated and was not their friends by any means, also adding that he manipulated him to basically tell an embarrassing story of May's, which ended up being told to the entire goddamn audience. All because he really wanted May to lose the contest. But surprisingly, Harley really bent over and showed his thick ass because he was so happy to see May and behaved really friendly this time, and immediately apologized for his behavior in their last encounter, admitting that he was very happy to see May and to see her in the Grand Festival, saying that she deserved it, and practically begged for forgiveness for what happened last time, leaving May speechless. Actually didn't know what the fuck to even say. Was Harley being a liar again, or was he telling the truth? A confused May then decided to forgive Harley upon seeing him literally kneel, begging for forgiveness, and cry too, with May stating that it had been a long time since Harley had done that bad thing to her before, so she was willing to forgive him, leading Harley to express his relief by sighing and express his thankfulness to May for forgiving him and his pure happiness in every way possible, almost being as happy as when he first met May to begin with. He was practically going insane with happiness, grabbing her hands and trying to hug her and shit like that, which actually kind of frightened May due to how intense Harley was being. Ash and Max were also wary of Harley's behavior, with Max simply calling Harley a weirdo and Ash declaring that he didn't trust Harley and was going to keep his eye on her. However, Caroline believed that Harley was fully sincere in his apology, because, she was stupid like that. Harley, since he got so close to May, spotted the rose in her hands, and upon noticing Drew, he asked who the fuck Drew was, and asked if the rose had come from him, leading May to realize that Harley hadn't met Drew before, so May introduces Harley to Drew. Drew then introduced himself to Harley, but he got annoyed, as Harley actually recognized the name Drew and realized who Drew was, going on and on and on, giving Drew a whole bunch of compliments, saying that all trainers wanted to be like him. He was the trainer to beat. And therefore, Harley looked forward to facing Drew someday and proving his own strength. Drew just stood there frozen in shock as Harley continued to ramble about how fucking powerful Drew was, and then Harley turned his attention back to May, commenting that he was surprised how Drew and May were friends, as he didn't think that May had such powerful friends, although May clarified that they were not friends whatsoever, as Drew just made fun of her most of the time. Although Harley simply denied what May had just said, saying that there was no way her and Drew weren't actually friends, and if anything, they were more than that, as since Drew had given May a rose, it was obviously a sign of a romantic connection between the two of them, and May got embarrassed at this, blushing, when Harley was like, "Oh yeah, you guys are fucking, there's some magic going on between you two, yeah." Seeing May embarrassed, Harley laughed, happy that his assumption was right, and he then takes out his camera, like he had with May, and he takes a picture of Drew, which only confused him even more, hoping that Harley wasn't trying to, jack off to his picture, or some shit. Drew then gets even more confused, as Harley zooms his camera out and takes a picture big enough to cover both May and Drew's Roselia, and then he laughs as he says goodbye and walks off. Drew was so fucking confused and just done with the whole situation that he said fuck it and just left immediately. He was just fucking done, and his Roselia followed. And this left May alone. So she goes back to the gang and her mother and expresses that Harley talked so much and said so many different things that she wasn't sure whether to believe if he was really sorry and really a nice guy. Max stated that there was no use wondering about Harley's intentions, as it was pretty obvious that Harley likely had something up his sleeve and was a huge phony, and May agreed, putting her confused nature completely to bed. Sure enough, May was right to think that Harley didn't have the best intentions, because as Harley was walking away, making his way further into Slateport City, away from the contest hall, he said to himself that he would get his revenge on May, and stopped in the middle of the road to come up with a plan to try and ruin her life or some shit, I don't know. Meanwhile, Team Rocket, with James still disguised as Norman and Jesse still disguised as Norman's manager, were now having their counseling session, having set up an entire stand, basically. This counseling involved examining all of the trainers who attended the counseling session's Pokemon, and telling them their battle stats, how well they were doing, and all that shit. Basically just how good they were. There was obviously a long line of people waiting to have their Pokemon examined in the counseling session. So James decided to send out his Chimecho, claiming that Norman apparently had one, to keep everyone entertained while they waited in line. Eventually, a trainer with an Espeon was the first one in line, so James, disguised as Norman, examined Espeon and commented that it had been raised very well. But James also added that with his skills as a gym leader, he could make Espeon become even stronger, and this excited the Espeon's trainer, so they willingly handed it over after Norman promised to train it well. So, with that, Jesse, still disguised as Norman's manager, took Espeon backstage into a tent, claiming that that's where Espeon would be trained. And once Jesse was gone, a whole bunch of other people in the crowd happily jumped up to the front of the line, really wanting Norman to train their Pokemon as well. Meanwhile, Harley was passing by Team Rocket's little stand that they set up, and he seemed really interested to see Norman, knowing how strong Norman was, and falling for Team Rocket's disguise. Harley even debated giving one of his Pokemon to James, who he thought was Norman, to look after, but Harley then decided against the idea, saying that if he truly wanted to prove himself to everyone, including Norman, then it would be best if he trained his Pokemon on his own. We then see Jessie behind the curtain at Team Rocket's stand, where she had brought Espeon, where Meowth was waiting, as Jessie placed Espeon in a cage. Yeah, it should have been obvious, but Team Rocket were just capturing all the Pokemon that they claimed they were taking backstage for a while to train up. Meowth suggested to Jessie that they already had enough Pokemon now, so they should probably make their escape before all the other trainers realized that they were scamming them, but Jessie refused to leave, saying that every one of the Pokemon was quite powerful, so they had to steal every single one of all the coordinators' Pokemon and all the crowd's Pokemon. They couldn't let a single one go free. Meanwhile, May decided to train with her Beautyfly, wanting to show off Beautyfly's skills to her mother, so she had Beautyfly do its classic move that it did at a lot of the contests, circling around, causing sparkles to come off of it, as it used not even a single attack. That was just how it naturally was flying around, leading Caroline to really admire all of these sparkles that were coming off of Beautyfly, as Brock states that the special meal that he gave Beautyfly must have been working, causing these sparkles to come off naturally, and Ash then noticed that Brock's meal was definitely working, as Beautyfly was becoming more sparkly by the minute. To make Beautyfly even more sparkly and beautiful, May has Beautyfly use Silverwind, but immediately after this, Harley arrived, as he had decided to go away from Team Rocket's stand after he had saw May training with her Beautyfly, and that had caught his attention. Harley then went on and on about how great May was with her Silverwind from Beautyfly, and Harley was talking so loud that he got Drew's attention from relatively far away, and upon hearing Harley compliment May, Drew started to get a little jealous at the fact that May was getting praised and he wasn't, and he viewed himself as clearly better than her. As Harley continued to ramble and basically suck up to May, complimenting her to no end, and basically saying that he was going to do his best to make it as far as she would, in hopes that he could face her. Ash even started to believe that Harley was being sincere about his admiration for May, but Max still had his doubts. Harley then stated his belief that May's Silverwind was so good, she should just only use Silverwind and no other attacks, adding that she should ensure to use it for at least during all the preliminary matches, and stated that the judges would just have to admire the appeal of the Silverwind, and it was the appeals rounds after all. May didn't think that this was a good idea at first, because if she only used Silverwind, then Harley would know her entire strategy and be able to counter it with a different type of attack during his appeals, so that the judges would find that even more impressive and he could score more points or some shit. But Harley stated that since he cheated before, he had sworn to not have any ill intention towards May, and he basically wanted to make it up for last time by letting May win the Grand Festival, or at least letting May win before he himself won. May stated that she didn't want Harley to give her a handicap, and reminded him that he'd worked hard to get to the Grand Festival himself, getting 5 ribbons, and therefore he must strive for victory, although Harley standed by the fact that he wanted May to win. This touched May, admitting that she thought of Harley as a troublemaker, but now she changed his mind. Now she changed her mind. She saw that Harley truly had a change of heart, and she declared that on his behalf, she was going to make the Grand Festival a memory to remember for both of them. In fact, May was so pleased with Harley's change of heart that she actually suddenly decided that she would use Beautyfly's Silverwind only in honor of Harley, and she would let Harley compete at his full strength and even try and come up with something to counter her, confident that her Silverwind could do better. And she also wanted to at least see if she could potentially reward Harley for having a change of heart. Basically, she wanted to win the Grand Festival, but if Harley won, she now wouldn't be too upset either, stating that she wanted Harley to use his full power so that he didn't hold back against her if they ended up facing in the battle rounds. And she also wanted them both to be using their full strength so that they could truly see which one was better. Harley was overjoyed, and both he and May agreed to do their absolute best against each other, when suddenly Drew interrupted their conversation, advising May that only using Beautyfly's Silverwind was not a good idea, as relying on one singular attack would be very limiting and wouldn't show off all her potential strategies, whereas if she used multiple moves, then she could showcase her talents better, and the contest performance would overall just be more entertaining. And also tells May not to trust Harley's advice, because he didn't know jack shit about contests, stating that they shouldn't be too excited to battle each other, as it could distract them, and contests were supposed to be competitive. You're supposed to hate your opponent to give yourself more motivation to win. Although Harley just tells May not to listen to Drew, saying that Drew was just jealous of not getting Harley's advice himself, and adds that if May truly wanted to know for a fact if using only Silverwind would be a good strategy, then she should just go over to Norman, the Petalburg gym leader, since he had more knowledge than both him and Drew. Even Harley could admit that, apparently. And he also stated that he had heard Norman giving out advice a bit farther away to some trainers, and he had taken in the advice while he was walking by. May was left massively confused, questioning how Norman could be at the Grand Festival, since he should have been back in Petalburg at his gym. Harley, of course, still thought that James was actually Norman, and he said that he could prove that Norman was at the Grand Festival, as he had a flyer that advertised Norman's quote-unquote counseling that was placed by Meowth around Slateport, and also he took out one of the pre-signed fake Norman autograph posters that he managed to grab by going up to Team Rocket's tent for a second, deciding to grab an autograph of Norman, even if he wasn't going to get it, even if he wasn't going to intentionally try and have his Pokemon looked after by him. When May and Max took a look at the signed autograph, though, they realized that the handwriting didn't look like their dad's normal handwriting, although admitted that it could have been a little different since they hadn't seen him for a while. Harley was shocked because he had just heard that Norman was apparently May and Max's dad, and he didn't believe this, but Ash confirmed that they were Norman's children. May, Max, and Caroline then remembered that Norman was supposed to be at the gym, right? So this couldn't have been his handwriting. He couldn't have been at Slateport. So they asked Harley to take them over to Norman so they could see if he really was there. And Norman obliged, taking them over to Team Rocket's little stand they had set up, where they were giving more counseling on a trainer's Illumise. And right as Ash and the gang approached, James had finished his analysis of Illumise, and he asked his manager, quote-unquote Jesse, to put it backstage so he could train it later, with the trainer giving permission. And Jesse then put Illumise backstage as asked. Anyways, Caroline, who had approached with Ash and the gang, heard a trainer in the crowd ask where Caroline was and why she wasn't with Norman, with one of the trainers suggesting that maybe his manager was his wife Caroline. And this brought Caroline's attention to Jesse, and knew that this couldn't have possibly been Norman, because Norman wouldn't have cheated on her and brought a new woman with him. And even if they were just friends, she was sure she would have been introduced to this woman first. And Caroline solidified that James wasn't Norman for two reasons. One, Norman didn't have a Chimecho, and two, Norman would never give advice to trainers in exchange for taking their Pokemon backstage to examine them himself. He would never do that shit. Hearing what Caroline said, Ash was convinced that Norman wasn't Norman either, and right as Jesse went to go put Illumise in the tent, he went right up to Jesse and James, butting in front of the whole line, and stated that he knew they were imposters, and demanded that they reveal themselves and who they truly were, leading Team Rocket to plead with Ash not to make any wild accusations, assuring Ash that they were the real Norman and his manager. And they state that Ash should be careful about who he was calling an imposter. May was convinced that James wasn't Norman as well, and stated that she knew that this Norman wasn't her actual father, and she had Beautyfly use Silverwind to cause a huge blast of wind that blew off Team Rocket's disguises, revealing their true identities as Team Rocket. And it also blows away the curtain that led to backstage, which reveals Meowth and all the Pokemon that they took, now encased in cages, not getting ready to be trained later. All the trainers that had given their Pokemon were furious as fuck, obviously, but Team Rocket didn't care, as Meowth simply pressed a red button, which revealed that they actually had a helicopter that was installed at the top of the cage. So they quickly hopped on the cage, and the button caused the helicopter part to take off and lift them into the air, with all the captured Pokemon in cages inside of a massive cage, basically. However, Team Rocket had spent so much money and time making the cage be able to float up into the air, they forgot to make it electric-proof, so this allowed Pikachu to use Thunderbolt to send Team Rocket blasting off and destroying the massive cage, which sent all of the cages with the individual Pokemon in them falling down. So Beautyfly used the Silver Wind to make all the cages fall softly. Basically, the wind was able to lift the cages up a little bit, so they only fell a couple feet, since, they gained height again, as opposed to just falling straight from the top of the sky and potentially injuring the Pokemon when they fell. And to make matters even better, Pikachu's Thunderbolt had sent Team Rocket blasting off, along with Chimecho and Wobbuffet. Beautyfly and Pikachu then come back to Ash and May, and both the trainers congratulate their Pokemon, as all of the trainers get their Pokemon out of their cages, very grateful to have them back, as they thank Ash and May and Pikachu and Beautyfly for their assistance with getting the Pokemon back, and cheer at the fact that Team Rocket was now gone. Just then, Harley, who had taken a backseat during all this, startles May as she comes back up to him, and compliments Beautyfly's Silverwind, saying he was getting much better and getting stronger, with May admitting that after seeing Silverwind save all the Pokemon, she now had more confidence in it, and would rely on Silverwind to breeze through the preliminary rounds, no pun intended. Basically, she was going to use only Silverwind, not because of Harley's advice, but because she actually thought it would be a good strategy herself. As Beautyfly lands on her head, and she explains the plan to it, as Harley compliments May some more, a whole bunch. Drew had been observing all of this once again, doing his classic eavesdropping with Roselia, and he was still concerned that May would actually do well, only relying on one attack, and was a bit skeptical that Harley had planned that May would eventually gaslight herself into using the attack the whole time. A little while later, all the coordinators got ready, going into the Slateport Grand Festival Contest Hall, while the audience took their seats as well, including Caroline, Ash, Max, and Brock. The judges were then introduced by Vivian, as she officially declared the start of the Hoenn Grand Festival appeals rounds, introducing, of course, the Slateport Nurse Joy, Raul Contesta, and Mr. Sukizo. Anyways, Vivian then officially introduced all 247 contestants and announced all of the appeals rounds as they happened. First, we saw a whole bunch of random-ass trainers go, including a trainer with a Zigzagoon who used Shadow Ball, and next, we saw Robert's Milotic sparkling as it came out of his Pokeball for his appeal round, and it continued to sparkle, and did something similar to the performance that we first saw Robert at, which was back at the original Slateport contest, I believe. That's right, guys, Robert was back, and he was definitely a threat, because he won that contest he was in before. It was absolutely certain that Robert was a threat, because the audience started cheering when Robert's performance had ended, and it was revealed that for the Grand Festival, the scores weren't out of 30, they were out of 100, I guess, and Robert got a 98. After a few more random-ass performances, next up, it was Drew's turn. He decided to use Roselia, and had it use Petal Dance while spinning to shower the stage and the crowd with flower petals, and this earned him a 95. While the audience cheered immensely, including Caroline, Max, May, Ash, and Brock, who all got to watch from the actual stands, because you got to watch from the stands even if you were a coordinator, because there were so many goddamn coordinators. Next up was Harley, who used his Cacturn, and he had to use a Bullet Seed, and he had Cacturn jump and do a flip while using Bullet Seed, leaving Ash and the gang amazed with Cacturn's incredible speed as it flipped and used a Bullet Seed around the entire goddamn stadium, leaving even Brock impressed with the speed as well. Remarking that Harley wasn't just bragging about having skills, and he truly did have skills. Although he ended up only getting an 84, so Max teased that Harley really just had speed and nothing else. The performance didn't really look that cool. May was the next one up, so she went backstage, preparing to go on stage, right as Harley walked off. So they ended up meeting each other backstage, and Harley wished May luck and high-fived her, with Harley also reminding May to rely on Beautyfly's Silverwind only for the preliminary rounds, like she said, assuring her that it would be a good strategy, and May promised that she would use it. as she went out to the stage and sent out Beautyfly, who came out with sparkles because of the meal that Brock had fed it. While Brock, May, Max, and Caroline comment on how beautiful Beautyfly looked, May noticed the gigantic ribbon symbol that was on the bottom of the stadium, and this made her even more determined to win, as she had Beautyfly use a silver wind toward the sun, which, in turn, created little tiny sparkles, sending the sparkles down to the ground, making it look like they were showering down from the sun, as opposed to just falling down after being emitted by Beautyfly. Basically, it was an illusion, but it was a beautiful one. The silver wind even hit the audience, dazzling them, while Harley watched from backstage in the waiting room, as at least a few coordinators were allowed in at a time, and Harley was evilly smirking to himself as it was revealed that Harley did have ulterior motives, as I'm sure we knew by now, because he thought that Silverwind was actually a shit attack all along, and he thought that May using it would give her a really bad score. So, much to her shock, by the end of May's performance, after only using Silverwind, May had received an 88, leading Harley to see that his plan had backfired, since May actually got a higher score than him, since he only got an 84. Harley was mad as fuck, but then he saw Drew come into the waiting room backstage, and he immediately got rid of his anger, trying to act all happy and friendly, as he usually was, waving to Drew, although Drew wasn't falling for Harley's ruse one bit. He could see right through him. Eventually, the first round of the preliminaries, or the appeals rounds, came to an end. So, with that, Ash and the gang all went back to the Pokemon Center to relax for a little bit, along with Caroline, as Caroline, Brock, Ash, and Max congratulated May on doing well. Just then, Harley comes up behind Ash and the gang and Caroline, startling them, managing to get rid of his mad and sad demeanor as best he could, acting like his usual happy self, as he started to congratulate May as well, and talked about how awesome she did with the Silverwind strategy, leading May to thank Harley for the Silverwind strategy, admitting that it was working very well. Harley then reminds May to keep using the Silverwind strategy, assuring her that it would keep working, and May, once again, promised to keep using it. Why was Harley still hellbent on having her use Silverwind? Did he maybe think that this first preliminary round was a fluke here? I don't fucking know. Just then, Drew happens to walk by Ash and the gang, Caroline and Harley as well, but before he could get close and say anything, everyone's attention was then brought to the screen at the top of the Slateboard contest hall that showed Vivian as she officially announced everyone who had passed into the second appeals rounds. And as she announced who passed, their profile pictures appeared on the screen, taking her place on the screen. First, it was revealed that Robert had, of course, earned the first place so far with a 98. Drew was in third place, and May was in 48th place, with Harley coming in behind her, but pretty far behind her, but he had passed regardless. Harley and May then congratulated each other on passing, while the rest of the gang and Caroline congratulated May as well. May saw that she would have plenty of stiff competition, and hoped that her Silverwind strategy would be enough to help her win. As for Drew, he just watched, deciding not to say anything.